Thanks for the invitation here today. My name is Karen. I'm a percussionist by training. I focus on contemporary new music, but I also wear another hat as an artistic director of contemporary Musiking, which I'll talk a tiny little bit later. When it comes to multimodal mapping, all that stuff, I don't, to be honest, I don't really know what this is until I was talking to Vervoordt one day, and he was like, oh, just like how you approach transcribing or translating that data into what you can do with it. And then I started to understand that perhaps some of the work that I've done before is along the lines of multimodal mapping. I don't know, but perhaps we can talk about that later. As a percussionist by training, I used to do a lot of performances, solo percussion, ensemble percussion works, and then I got into live processing stuff. So I was performing on acoustic instruments, but some of the sounds are being live processed through Max or PD, etc., which I'll talk about later. One of this performance that I've done recently is called Somnium, and this is a trance installation opera by Steve. We did it in 2022. It was during COVID, and I was in the theater while there was another installation part at the gallery. But at the theater, I was a performer, and in fact, I had a role as a daughter, and I had a dad over there who's on the right side, and I interact with him musically in the show, as well as Steve, who is the one of the performer in the show, where he kind of transfers between the gallery and the theater. And I like to talk about this work because here I have an instrument that's developed by Kenny, actually, which he'll talk about it more later. I had this instrument that didn't really look like an instrument. And maybe I'll show you a little bit. As you can see, I was the person with the glowing ball. And in fact, the glowing ball is an instrument that's developed by Kenny using gyroscope and OSC, I believe, and he'll talk about it more later. But what my role was to use it as an instrument. So in fact, I've been using a lot of non-instrument, I guess, objects and instruments that are made perhaps interactive media based. And in this work, I was working with this instrument that was able to control the multi-channel speakers in the room. And if you remember, there was a tone that was a slightly off A sign tone behind it. That was a tone that I was actually controlling. And in the multi-channel theater setting, I was changing the direction. I was also changing the dynamics So the louder, the softer. And also, I think that those were only 2 factors that I was changing. And it didn't really require any skills, but I was actually, in a way, I was kind of transferring how I approach percussion into using this instrument. Because all I had to do was to move it very steadily so we can hear the direction changes, we can hear the dynamic changes. And I was kind of just transferring what I've learned all these years as a percussionist into using these instruments that are abnormal in a way. So that's the glowing ball I was interacting with. And in fact, this ball really had no difference to the other objects I was interacting with. Earlier in the video, you saw I was just making sounds out of these metal objects, these wooden pieces. But to me, they're pretty much the same. And then this is another performance that I did earlier this year at the School of Creative Media. It was presented by the Hong Kong Music Ensemble. I was working with this Lazy Susan by this artist, Viola Yip, who is a composer, but also an excellent artist who works with a lot of different mediums. And she gave me this instrument. Basically, it's a little Lazy Susan that's like, you know when you go to a dim sum restaurant, those turning tables? Exactly, those tables, but with 3 different speakers on it. And they have different size, and the feedback response is so different. I also was given a PD patch to control the feedback level, the gain level, but also adding some of the delay, reverb, and all that stuff. I was given that remotely, so she sent it to me through DHL. I received it, and then I opened it, and then, okay, this is my instrument. So I spent some time at home just kind of getting to know how to really make good sounds out of it. Because to be fair, pointing a mic to the microphone, that ain't gonna sound good, honestly. So I was working around with applying different objects to turn that feedback into something that I could use musically. Yes, thank you. So as a percussionist, I work with one instrument, so you know, a wood block. I also work with instruments that look like drums with skins on top of it, but I also work with metal instruments, for instance, like bells, glockenspiels, and all that stuff. So I have an understanding of how different objects work when I apply them to on microphones and the speakers. So I noticed that working with metal objects, and especially metal objects that create a bowl shape, would help changing the feedback and would help me to control this feedback better. So I just went to my kitchen and collected all these pans that I haven't been using and it's been rusty, and I just applied them to the speakers, and I was quite happy. To be honest, I was quite happy with this result. I was able to have my own personal contribution in this instrument that she gave me. And in fact, she gave this to 3 other artists. One of them was in Mexico, one of them was Montreal, one of them was in Scandinavia, and we had this telematic performance where my sound was actually being fed to them, and then their sound was actually being fed to in Hong Kong and being panned around another multi-channel system out there. And then sometimes it gets picked up by this mic on top too. So there's like this ongoing I guess feedback conversation dialogue going on in this instrument. and it was a lot of fun working on this. So that's the instrument. Originally when it came in, it was just like 3 speakers. And I actually also used the mic, kind of inspired by the pendulum music, where I was just like swinging the mic around, and but also working with a PD patch, because performing with so many items for an hour as a soloist is kind of difficult to, you know, really plan out or live compose what I wanted to explore. So, but as a percussionist working with large setups, small setups, I grew comfortable very soon after a few practices. And then these are some other projects that I've done before, maybe not so related, but I've worked with a chessboard as an instrument where I was just playing chess. I just played a game by memory. Because I have, I feel comfortable working in a theater setting, but also performing my own instruments, or like abnormal instruments. So I get these invitations to doing weird stuff. And also there on the right bottom, this is Gabert's Keep Breathing at Zero. That happened in 21, where I was interacting with the robotic arms and stuff. But that was all programmed, so I was mostly performing as like an actor in that. And then in my other lives, I've done percussion solo where I've used body as my instrument. And then I'm going to move forward to talk about my other hat, which is as a curator at our festival Soundforms at CMHK, Contemporary Music in Hong Kong. I like to talk about this because it is also I was just trying to figure out what my approach to mapping or multimodal mapping is. If it's somehow translating some of the translated data or understanding or experiences, and perhaps my curatorial approach is somewhere along the lines of that, because starting in 21, I was curating this festival, and I noticed that it's actually very hard to find sound artists to be part of this festival, because these days no one really calls themselves sound artists, because we don't really have a solid or concrete definition of what sound art is. So I figured out if that's the case, then that means that I don't need a sound artist to be here for a sound festival. So I started gathering these different people coming in, photographers, choreographers, visual artists, media artists, to reflect on how they would create using sound as a medium. And as a result, this is what the festival is. If you see the biggest picture over there, this is Lazarus over here, and he was actually our exchange artist to Triple I in The Hague 2 years ago, and then he performed this work. It was an installation of this instrument he built based on the data he collected at a battery ground. And eventually he actually went to The Hague last year to do some more of that. And then on the top right corner, I had this light artist and a sound artist working together on building this instrument that uses light as a sensor to trigger a sound. So he created this whole room of these instruments that would only produce sound using light, and applying these reflective materials, and have these audience standing so close to each other by having light coming through gaps. So it kind of uses a whole room as one instrument itself. And then I also had choreographer and actually Suhi as a choreographer and Michelle as visual artists working together, finding out what intimacy means in terms of sonically, but also in touch as an intimacy. And then lastly, I also had a DJ, a vinyl DJ performance where he was collecting these old vinyls and cutting them and pasting them together again and doing this DJ set. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.